Story 1. Back in the early 2000s, I worked for a store that sold overpriced CDs. It wasn't a bad gig, and I actually enjoyed the job, except for one coworker, Karen. From day one, we just didn't get along. I tried to make the best of it, but she was always on the edge of being a bully. Things got worse when she was promoted to key holder. The little power she gained went straight to her head, and she turned into a full-blown tyrant. She made my life miserable, to the point where a job I once loved became something I dreaded. I eventually had enough and made a formal complaint to Human Resources. It turns out my complaint uncovered something bigger. Karen and the assistant manager were dating, which was a big no-no according to company policy. HR investigated, and Karen got moved to another store as a result. Apparently, she didn't like her new store and ended up quitting not long after. Fast forward a few months, and I was happily working at a bookstore chain that has since gone out of business. Life was good again until I found out that Karen had gotten a job at another location of the same bookstore chain, just at a different mall. Over the next few months, she started doing little things to annoy me, like hanging up whenever I called her store for a customer, or putting me on hold forever. Of course, I'd get in trouble for not handling customers effectively, thanks to her antics. Then, one day, I heard some juicy gossip that got my mind spinning. Word on the street was that Karen had been injured in a car accident and had hurt her back. She went on medical leave because she couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes at a time without excruciating pain at least. That's what she claimed. Her store couldn't hire anyone to replace her while she was on leave, so they were short-handed, and her manager was getting pretty fed up after a few months. About 2 months later, I decided to go play pool with some friends. While I was there, I ran into Rick, a former coworker from the overpriced CD store. "Rick, man, too bad you weren't here last night. It would have been like a reunion. Karen and the assistant manager were here playing pool." Me? Karen was playing pool. Rick: "Oh yeah, they come in every Wednesday night." Me: "Really? That's interesting. Every Wednesday, huh? How long has this been going on?" Rick: "A few months now." So, for the entire time she was supposedly on medical leave, unable to stand for more than 10 minutes, Karen had been out playing pool every Wednesday night. The next day, I went over to her bookstore and asked to speak with her manager. I told him everything I had learned about her weekly pool sessions and suggested he check it out for himself the following Wednesday night. Sure enough, the next Thursday, Karen was fired. The last time I saw her, she and a friend were trying to follow me home from work. I called the police and led them straight to the police station, where the officers told her to leave me alone or face arrest. After that, she finally stayed away from me for good. Story 2. I just graduated 2 months ago with a degree in teaching English and economics and found a job even before graduating. I was really excited to start working, especially since I didn't enjoy my teaching practice much. I'm a 23-year-old male, but I look like I'm 17 or 18, which is pretty annoying, and I think you can guess where this is going. At the school where I work, there's a hallway, known as the Forbidden Hallway, that students aren't allowed to use because the administration offices are located there. However, teachers and staff are allowed to go through it. The first few weeks were great. I made sure that the rest of the team knew I was a new teacher and introduced myself so that everyone knew my name. After about a week, most of the staff were familiar with who I was. One day, I was walking through the building, checking my cell phone for updates and looking at Smartual, a website we use at school. Suddenly, I heard a loud shriek. "Put away that cell phone. You aren't allowed to use that indoors," I thought to myself. Oh, a student must have been caught with their phone and didn't give it much thought. A few minutes later, I wanted to walk through the forbidden hallway when I felt a tug on my collar. I turned around to find a middle-aged woman, let's call her Karen, standing there. I didn't know Karens could become teachers, but there she was. I had never seen her before at the school, but since I had just started working there, I figured I must have missed her. Here's how the interaction went down. Karen: "Hey, you aren't allowed to walk through here." Me: "I had just started working. so I thought maybe I wasn't allowed to be there. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I could walk through here. Karen, are you new here? Me, oh, yes, I am. I'm your name. Nice to meet you. I extended my hand to shake hers, as I always do when meeting people, especially at work. She looked at me, then at my hand, and back at me. Karen, you should talk to me with a bit more respect, and you're not allowed to use your cell phone in the building. Me, oh, but I was just checking. Karen, I don't care. Students aren't allowed to use their cell phones. Me, but I'm not. Karen, don't lie to me. I saw you using your phone. She didn't even let me finish my sentence to explain that I wasn't a student. She assumed I was, and that I was denying using my phone. I've been following these kinds of posts for a while, and I always told myself that if I encountered someone who kept interrupting me, I'd just stand up to them to make them listen. Big mistake. Me, listen here, lady. In my language, lady can sound a bit condescending and rude, especially when said by a student. Karen, how dare you talk to me like that? I will get you expelled for that. The bell rang, and she stormed off, yelling, "You will hear from me again." I was just standing there, wondering what on earth had just happened. An hour later, I was in the teacher's lounge during my free period, still trying to make sense of what had just occurred. There were only a few colleagues in the lounge, minding their own business. Suddenly, Karen entered, saw me, turned red, and erupted like a volcano. Karen, what are you doing here? Everyone looked up, startled. She marched over to me and tried to grab me again. I got up and stepped back, trying to explain that I was a teacher, but before I could get a word out, she grabbed me and tried to drag me out of the lounge. I don't usually mind if people tap me on the shoulder or even hug me to congratulate me, but this was something else entirely. Karen, you are not supposed to be here. Me, let go of me, you crazy person. I slapped her hand away. She turned even redder, which I didn't think was possible. Karen, how dare you? At that moment, a nice colleague, let's call her Eve, entered the room. Eve, Karen, what are you doing? Let go of your name. Karen was still trying to grab me and drag me out. Karen, no, he's been disrespecting me, using his phone in the hallway, going through the forbidden hallway, and now insulting me. I'm taking him to the principal's office. Eve, Karen, he's a teacher here. Karen looked at me, then at Eve, and then at the rest of the lounge. A few more colleagues had entered the room, and they were standing in the doorway with shocked expressions on their faces. Karen, She stormed out of the room. I was left standing there, shaking and red-faced. Eve, are you okay? Your name? Me, yes, I think so. Eve, what happened? Why did she do that? I explained the whole situation. Eve, why didn't you tell her you were a teacher here? Me, I tried, but she kept interrupting me, calling me a liar, and threatening to get me expelled every time I opened my mouth. Some colleagues chuckled as I told the story, while others were just shocked. A few minutes later, Karen walked in with the principal. Principal, your name, come with me. I was terrified. The principal is a pretty intimidating guy, and I had no idea what Karen had told him. The next few minutes felt like a nightmare. Karen had apparently told the principal that I insulted her, called her names, which, unfortunately, was true, and assaulted her, also true, though she left out the part where she grabbed me first. Principal, your name? Karen told me that you hit her, called her names, and verbally assaulted her. Is this true? Me, well, yes, but... Karen, see? I told you. Principal, Karen, calm down. Your name, you've just started working here. What were you thinking? You can't assault fellow colleagues at work. I wanted to cry. I'm not very emotional, but this was too much for me. Naturally, this made me look guilty, like a child caught doing something wrong and crying because of it. Principal, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to let you go. Me, but I didn't do anything, I blurted out, sobbing. Principal, Karen told me. Me, she lied. Nothing she said was true. I then told him the entire story, though Karen kept trying to interrupt and calling me a liar. When I finished, Karen said, "Well, it's his word against mine." She seemed to have forgotten that there were witnesses. I mentioned this to the principal, and they called in Eve, who confirmed everything except for the previous incident with my cell phone and in the forbidden hallway. "Principal, your name and Eve, could you excuse us for a minute?" Eve and I walked out, and as we closed the door, we heard the principal's outburst. "Principal, you incompetent, lying person. You came to my office crying and screaming bloody murder because you mistook him for a student. You didn't even let him explain himself. Then, on top of that, you assaulted him? In front of other staff? You're going to hear from me about this." The principal called me back into the office after Karen left. "Principal, would you like me to call the police?" Me, no, I'd rather not. I was still shaking and not thinking straight. I had just started working there, and Karen seemed like the type of person to twist the story around and blame me, so I didn't want my future chances to be affected by this. "Principal, okay? If you need anything or if she bothers you again, just let me know." Since then, Karen has been trying to avoid me. When that's not possible, she just pretends not to see me. The other colleagues have been very supportive, and I'm lucky to work with them. I hope you all enjoyed this. I don't know what punishment Karen received from the principal or if there were any consequences for her, but I'm just happy it's over. Story 3. This happened just a few days ago, and I'm still shaking my head at how crazy some people can be. So, here's my encounter with a woman who clearly believes the world should bow to her every whim. A little background first. I'm single, and after my wife passed away from a sudden illness, I've never remarried. Since the pandemic hit, my grandmother, who's in her 90s, and my cousin and her mother have been living with me. They're great, and we've never had any problems. They help around the house as much as they can, and even pitch in on the bills from time to time, which I really appreciate. My cousin is a special needs boy with a compromised immune system, and of course, my grandma's immune system isn't what it used to be either. Because of their health conditions, I'm extra careful when I have to go out. When I come back home, I always take a shower and change into a fresh set of clothes before being around them. It's just necessary precautions in these times. Now, usually, I order everything we need online, but on this particular day, I couldn't do that because the delivery system was down for some reason. So, I decided to go out shopping for food and a few things for a special diet one of them has to follow. Once I got to the store, I grabbed a cart and started shopping. I was minding my own business, going through my list, when I heard someone snapping their fingers behind me. I ignored it because, well, I didn't work there. I was wearing jeans and a black shirt with some band's logo on it, definitely not the store uniform. But apparently, someone mistook me for an employee anyway. Suddenly, I felt someone yelling right in my ear, "Are you going to help me or not?" I jumped, completely startled, and turned around. "What the?" I started, but before I could finish, I saw her. There she was, the Karen of all Karens. She had short hair, was dressed in clothes a size too small, and had this sour expression on her face. She shouted again, "Help me now or I'm getting you fired." I stared at her for a second, trying to process what just happened, and then told her, "I don't work here. Now get lost and go bother an actual employee." She stepped back, clearly not expecting me to shout back at her. Her mouth dropped open like she had never been spoken to that way in her entire life. Then, she wound up her hand to slap me. I blocked her swing and said calmly, "That's one." She tried again, and I blocked it again. "That's two. One more and I'll slap you back." She screamed, "I'm getting you fired," and stomped off, fuming. As she walked away, I yelled after her, "Don't let the doorknob hit you on the way out." I could see her shoulders tense up as she kept going. I was still fuming, but I just wanted to finish my shopping and get home. A store employee came up to me, having heard the commotion. "Employee, what was all that yelling about?" I explained what had happened, and the employee was smirking as I described the encounter. We chatted for a bit, and I started to calm down. But then, we heard that same nasty voice again. "Karen, That's him. The one who wouldn't help me and threatened me when I asked for his help. I want him fired right now." The manager, who had come over by this point, looked confused. "Ma'am, he doesn't work here. I can't fire customers." Karen wasn't having it. "Yes, he does. Fire him right now or I'm filing a complaint with corporate." The manager tried to explain again. "You're welcome to file a complaint, but he really doesn't work here." That's when she lost it. Her face turned purple, and she charged at me, managing to slap me this time. Now, I don't normally believe in hitting women, but out of pure defensive instinct, I slapped her back hard enough that she spun around and hit the floor. Store security arrived just then and restrained me, thinking I was the one who started it. Karen got up and started screaming that I had assaulted her and demanding the police be called. She tried several more times to get at me, and security had to restrain her too. The employee who had been talking to me earlier spoke to the manager and explained what had really happened, confirming that Karen had been the aggressor. When the police arrived, Karen went off on a profanity-laced rant, demanding I be fired and arrested and claiming she would sue me and live off the money. The police walked me a few feet away from her and asked for my side of the story. I told them everything and mentioned that the security camera footage would back me up. While one officer listened to her exaggerated story, another checked the recordings. When they came back, one of them pulled out handcuffs. Karen looked smug, probably thinking I was about to be arrested, but her face changed completely when the officer told her to turn around and not resist. She was dragged out of the store, kicking and screaming about how she was the victim. After things calmed down, one of the officers asked if I wanted to press charges. Since the footage clearly showed I was defending myself and didn't use excessive force, I said yes. Later, I found out that she had harassed other shoppers before, but had never physically assaulted anyone until now. Her family even contacted me to apologize for her behavior, which I appreciated. They also told me they weren't going to bail her out, so she could sit in jail and think about her actions. Oh, and she's been banned from the store for life. Story 4. Note: Cousin's friend had several friends with him, but they were mostly chuckling or laughing, so they didn't say much. P1, P2, and P3 are passengers. Before we dive in, here's some background. My cousin is no pushover. For those who like wrestling, he's the kind of guy who could probably take on a famous wrestler like John Cena. That's a little insight into his personality, and it sets the stage for the story. So, my cousin, his younger brother who was 19 at the time, 2 years younger than when this took place, and my grandpa live in a wealthy neighborhood. There are 6 mansions, 3 on each side. The older couple who live there, along with an animal lover, started noticing litter showing up in their yards. These 2 houses are closest to the street, the first on each side. Cousin lives next to the animal lover, right in the middle. Soon, my cousin started finding trash in their yard too, maybe not as much, but still some. He finally had enough and decided to stake out a little patch of grass by the street to wait and see who was responsible. Sure enough, the next day, a car showed up, and the occupants started tossing trash from a popular fast food place onto the ground. One of them even threw a large soda. My cousin, with his lightning-fast reflexes, caught it mid-air. As they began to drive off, Cousin's friends started tossing more trash at the car. Cousin threw the soda right back, and it was a perfect shot. The soda was half full, so it splattered all over the car, making a sticky mess, and thanks to the stickiness, the trash Cousin's friends threw ended up sticking to the car as well. Driver and P2 are girls, while the others are boys, so you can imagine the voices. Driver: "What the heck?" Cousin: "Sorry, I just got tired of your trash. You know better than to throw your kids out, right?" That was Cousin's little joke, calling their trash kids. At this point, Cousin's friends are laughing. Driver: "We didn't do anything wrong. I'm suing you for assault." Cousin: "Ma'am, I can't let you throw trash here or anywhere, for that matter. Small kids live here, and so do my dogs." Driver: "Those are your dogs." Cousin: "Yes, why?" Driver: "They scare P3. For context, Cousin's dogs are a German Shepherd and a Husky, but P3 calls the Husky a wolf. They're very well behaved and never leave the yard unless it's to help people, play with the kids, or visit the animal lover who sometimes invites them over for treats and a little obstacle course. The older couple is now watching from their porch, and we later found out that the animal lover was watching from a window. Cousin, so? I don't care. This is my property, and I can own as many dogs as I want. At this point, driver tried to smack my cousin and screamed, "You jerk, don't you care about the community?" What happens next leaves driver and all the passengers with their mouths hanging open, eyes wide. Cousin's friends and the older couple are now laughing uncontrollably. My cousin pulls out his police badge and announces, "Cousin's name, leader of a SWAT team. Now, feel free to get out of the car and put your hands behind your back." Cousin's friends were actually his teammates. P3 and P2 didn't resist, but P1 jumped out of the car and started running. Cousin, calling his dogs by name, get him. The dogs chased after P1 in a flash. Cousin's friend, I think we've all been wondering this, but how old are you guys? P1 screams as one of the dogs bites him, and they drag him back to Cousin's friend. Finally, P3 breaks down under the pressure. We're all 14-15. Driver, shut up. Don't listen to him. I'm 16. She hands Cousin her license, and he tries to pull her out of the car. Cousin, do you really want me to read this? Driver, yes. She kept talking, but Cousin continued pulling her out. Cousin's friend, whoa, man, just read it. Cousin's friend and the rest of Cousin's friends were looking at a woman who was clearly at least 30, with a driver's license that had been renewed in 2018. It was 2018 at the time, so it was up to date. Cousin finally got her out and handcuffed her, and they drove the four of them to the station, filling out the necessary paperwork. 3 months later, they were in court. The trial was quick, there was just too much evidence against them, and even Dee's dad said something against her. The punishments were as follows. P3 and P2 were sentenced to community service. Nobody remembered how long and fined $1,500 each. P1 was fined $2,000 and given 2-3 years in prison, depending on his behavior, for resisting arrest. Driver received a $5,000 fine and a couple of years in prison for resisting arrest, littering, assault, assaulting an officer, and harassment. The harassment charge came because P3 revealed that driver and P1 had pressured him and P2 into littering. P2 and P1 confirmed this. P1 apologized, saying driver had pressured him into helping her. P2 backed this up, saying, "I thought I heard you two arguing." P1 didn't get an additional harassment charge. Instead, the judge added it to D's list of offenses. The judge declared the sentences final, with P1's being subject to change based on behavior. Driver started screaming and begging her dad to help, but he just pinched the bridge of his nose in exasperation. 2 years later, Cousin found P1, P2, and P3 working at the fancy market near the houses, so they wouldn't have to leave the neighborhood during the pandemic. They also put up a gate, though that went up in 2019, before the pandemic started. Cousin asked P1 how long he'd been out of jail. P1, I actually had my sentence cut by 1.5 years for good behavior. Cousin gave him some wine and bread for free as a peace offering. Meanwhile, driver is still in jail and hates it because guess who works at the prison she got sent to? That's right, Cousin and his friends, who regularly stop by her cell while they patrol her cell block. She started several fights, all of which ended with her being labeled as the aggressor. Story 5. So, I recently caught up with my uncle, and we got talking about my major. I'm studying computer science with a focus on programming. He told me this wild story about how he got his current position by getting fired. I couldn't believe how it all played out, so I thought I'd share it here. Several years ago, my uncle had this really awful boss. You know, the type constantly flaunting his status as a manager and making life miserable for everyone beneath him. He would nitpick over the smallest things. If you took 2 or 3 minutes too long on a break, he'd call you out. If you talked to a coworker for even a second, he'd give you a hard time. He even had a problem with people taking sips of water at their desks. My uncle and his coworkers absolutely hated this guy, but they loved their jobs, so they just dealt with it. My uncle told me that things were so bad, nobody wanted to interact with this boss outside of work. He wasn't invited to any parties or get-togethers, and no one wanted to be around him more than they had to. One day, this boss decided he was going to save the company some money. His brilliant plan: fire my uncle for poor performance and replace him with someone cheaper. The boss even had the nerve to say, "We can hire someone for less." Now, my uncle is one of the calmest, most logical people I know. He's also incredibly skilled in programming and had years of experience under his belt at that point. He knew there would be plenty of companies lining up to hire him, so he didn't put up a fight. He just calmly cleared out his desk and left that day. A month later, while my uncle was still weighing job offers, he got a call from his old boss. The boss was practically begging him to come back. My uncle, curious but not too eager, asked why. That's when the boss revealed that he was in big trouble with the company president for firing him. You see, my uncle had coded the entire system they used to distribute assignments and organize tasks. It was a crucial part of their operations, and the president had a lot of respect for my uncle's skills. When the president found out my uncle had been replaced by someone who, as my uncle put it, wouldn't know his backside from an array, he was furious, especially since the president hadn't even been informed about the change. The boss was desperate to fix the mess he had created. He offered my uncle his old job back, plus a raise, to try and convince him to return. My uncle took his time considering it, knowing he had other offers, but in the end, he agreed to come back under the new terms. The best part? The boss who had fired him got demoted and became even more isolated at work. He had always looked down on others, but now he was on the same level as the lesser employees he used to mock, and no one had any sympathy for him. It was a hilarious turn of events. My uncle got fired, only to be offered an even better position with higher pay because the boss had tried to save the company money. The boss, on the other hand, couldn't handle being on the same level as the people he once thought were beneath him, so he didn't stick around much longer. My uncle still has that position today, and his pay has only gotten better thanks to his skills. Meanwhile, the boss is long gone, probably regretting every decision he made in that situation. Story 6. I used to work at a job where we had workbenches or desks that were set up to best suit specific tasks. In short, we tested electronic assemblies, put them together, and did some troubleshooting when needed. Although we could be moved from desk to perform different tasks, some people were understandably a bit territorial about their desks and preferred to keep things the way they left them. We also had to share some tools, especially the more expensive ones like computer adapters used for programming the electronic devices we were testing. These tools often ended up at whatever desk they were last used, with no designated place for them to be returned. The managers didn't like employees visiting with each other while working, even if it was just making small talk. Over time, they started enforcing this rule more strictly. For instance, I would return a tool to a coworker's desk without saying a word, turn around, and go back to my own desk, only to get chewed out by a manager. I'd point out that the manager wasn't even within earshot, and if he had been, he'd have known that no words were exchanged. I wasn't told I couldn't return tools. The issue the managers had with me was that they assumed I was making small talk, even though most of the time our conversations were work-related. It was frustrating because it was difficult to agree on where to leave a tool when you couldn't talk to your coworkers. I came up with a few workarounds. There was a central computer that everyone used to move things in the system, and it was in a relatively central location with plenty of space on the desk. I didn't use this desk for any specific work duty, so I started leaving tools and adapters there when I was done with them. The managers didn't bother me if I left my desk to get a tool for my own use, as long as I didn't ask anyone except the managers for help finding it. So, if anyone asked me where a tool was, I'd just tell them to ask the manager. During breaks, I'd tell the guys who were always complaining about their tools going missing that I was leaving them at that central desk. I also mentioned that if anyone asked me where something was, and I didn't know, I'd send them to the manager since they were the ones always monitoring us whenever we were at someone else's desk. This system worked well enough for us workers, though it did result in everyone constantly chasing the managers around for tools. "Ask a manager" became a bit of a catchphrase. Meanwhile, the central desk became an impromptu tool desk, though things didn't stay there long enough for it to get cluttered. Then, the managers decided they were tired of everyone coming to them for tools. Instead of getting enough tools for everyone or implementing a system for returning them, they made a new policy. If someone asked you for a tool, you couldn't fob them off to management, you had to help them yourself. They even named the policy after me, likely because they figured out it was my idea to send people to them. Or maybe I was just doing it the most. They also banned tools from being left at the central desk, as well as specifically banning them from the break rooms, time clocks, and bathrooms unless you were fixing something in those areas. They didn't announce this rule officially. They just started writing people up for leaving tools there, and since we weren't supposed to talk to each other, we couldn't warn our coworkers about the rule change. Next, I tried leaving sticky notes at the desk from where I'd taken a tool, explaining where I was going with it, so that if someone needed it, they could come to my desk first. Unfortunately, the managers kept removing the sticky notes whenever they found them. Although I didn't get in trouble for this, I eventually stopped doing it. I wish I could say I left on my own terms after finding a new job, but the truth is, I was eventually dismissed from that job. I had to find a new one quickly because I was unemployed. Surprisingly, the company is still in business. Story 7. This happened a few years ago, but it still brings a smile to my face. I had been in a relationship with a guy, let's call him Steve, who seemed super nice on the surface, but turned out to be quite manipulative and a habitual cheater. While we were together, I took out a phone contract in my name for Steve since his credit score was poor, and the company wouldn't approve one for him. Everything seemed fine, and I never had any problems with him paying me back, even after we broke up. Then, just a month before the contract was up, a mutual friend dropped a bombshell on me. She had discovered the extent of Steve's cheating and lies, and thought I deserved to know. I had once been suspicious about Steve's relationship with a particular woman, but when I voiced my concerns, he gaslit me and turned himself into the victim. As it turned out, my suspicions were spot on. Needless to say, I confronted Steve, though I tried to remain as calm as possible. I was furious I had wasted literal years of my life being taken for a fool. The manipulation had continued long after the breakup, as we had remained friends, but I was finally done with it. I told him I was cutting him out of my life and that I never wanted to hear from him again. The confrontation didn't go down well, but by that point, he had already sent me the money for the final month of the contract, so I thought everything was settled. I was wrong. It turns out Steve could still rack up a pretty big charge if he went over his data allowance, something he had always been careful not to do. That's why I was sure it was deliberate when I received a final bill for nearly $80. I could have covered the bill and kept the door closed, but it would have been at the expense of other things, and I wasn't about to let that slide after everything else he had put me through. I contacted the phone company to make sure the charge wasn't due to some overlooked contract clause and confirmed that he had indeed racked up the bill in excess charges alone. It seemed he didn't like losing control over me. Determined to get my money back, I tried to reach out to Steve, but he had blocked me on every single avenue of contact I had for him. That's when I realized I still had his mother's number in my contacts. Without hesitation, I texted her with an outline of what had happened, how I had confronted her son about his treatment of me, and how I was convinced he had deliberately saddled me with a big phone bill as some sort of petty revenge. While she wasn't thrilled that her son's drama was landing on her doorstep via me, she asked for proof of the bill and said she'd take care of it. The money landed in my account within an hour, and I was free of him forever. I wish I could have seen the look on his face when his mother made him, a grown man, sort it out, especially since that amount of money wasn't small for him at the time. I know he occasionally still stirs up trouble about me years later, as the odd petty comment on his social media sometimes makes its way back to me through friends. If anything, this just makes my petty determination even sweeter. Getting the money back was nice, but having the last laugh was even better.